Have you ever heard the horrifying words for grave robbers? In today's video, we will explore a haunting story about an illegal gravedigger and the strange phenomena that happened afterward. Has he awakened the sleeping souls? Watch until the end to see what happens. If you like scary stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to turn off the notification bell to watch the latest videos. Thank you for follow. 9:30 at night, not a soul passing by. Sitting against the banyan tree along the dark village road, Kwong felt impatient, as if there was a fire burning in his heart. He had never felt time pass so slowly. Feeling restless, unable to hide his tension, Kwong fumbled to pull out a crumpled pack of cigarettes, took out a cigarette, and put it in his lips. As soon as the lighter was lit, his flushed face and the half-drunk bottle of wine beside him were visible. He took long drags, exhaling smoke with a long sigh. The wind blew fiercely, and several zigzag lightning bolts flashed as if to tear the dark sky apart. "A storm is coming. All the better," he muttered softly. After tonight, everything would change. He would have money to pay off his gambling father's debts and to fix up his dilapidated house. And more importantly, he would have money to ask for Lan's hand in marriage, the most beautiful girl in the village whom he had loved for a long time. Many times, Lan visited her house and expressed her desire to get married, but her parents always looked down on her and even hinted at her in front of Kong. When a girl gets married, she should choose someone with good financial conditions to reduce her suffering in the future. Don't be blind and marry someone without a stable job just because of love, who is poor and homeless. What will you have to live on? Then you will sit around cursing and insulting each other all day. It will be too late to regret it, my child. The voice of Mrs. Hugh, his lover's mother, still haunted his mind. My husband and I only have one daughter. After more than 20 years of raising her to be this beautiful, I don't want my child to suffer in the future. If you had a stable job and a decent family, we wouldn't forbid anything because we know you truly love Lan. But, well, think about your family's situation. You're 30 years old. What do you have? At first he felt sad and hurt, but after thinking about it, she was right. Born at a disadvantage compared to others, his mother died early. His father was depressed and threw himself into drinking and gambling, thinking that it was just a temporary moment to relieve his sadness. But unexpectedly, it got deeper and deeper, making his already poor family even more destitute. No matter how much money he made, he had to worry about paying off his gambling debts and debts to his father. While his friends at his age had enough to eat and save, he thought about his fate, always wandering and struggling, not knowing when he would have the chance to change his life. Kwong glanced at his lover and saw her looking down, looking embarrassed and awkward. He said to Mrs. Hugh with a firm attitude, "I promise you, by the end of this year, I will have a stable job and move out to live on my own. I will have enough money to take care of Lan. Please believe in me." Quickly waving her hand to interrupt, her voice grew louder. "He saves a little, he needs money immediately. A few months ago, he had 15 million, a large sum of money for him, which he had worked very hard to save from his job as a construction worker. Before he could be happy for long, his father became seriously ill and had to be transferred to the district hospital for treatment of liver disease caused by excessive alcohol consumption. After 2 months in the hospital, he had to quit his job to take care of him, and his money ran out. Difficulties piled on top of difficulties. Many times he could only blame God for treating him like this. People who start a business have a family as their foundation. If they don't have material things, then they have spirit. But here, he only has a big zero and a heavy burden on his shoulders." After being discharged from the hospital, Kwong showed a harsh attitude towards his father because of the frustration and difficulties he caused him. Mr. Lam also realized his mistake and said, "Dad knows you've worked hard. From now on, Dad promises to gradually quit drinking and gambling so you can focus on your business." But Kwong raised his head and asked, "But what else? I don't need you to earn money. I just need you to sit at home and rest. Don't let me be ashamed in front of Lan's family. That's all I need. Can't you do it too?" Mr. Lam waved his hand, his face contorted with regret. "I can quit. I can quit. But now, I still owe him 20 million. I just need you to help me pay." 20 million? Are you crazy? Do you know how much money that is? Hearing Kwang's harsh words, his eyes bulged with anger. Mr. Lam lowered his head and mumbled an explanation. Dad knows he was wrong. At this age, he should have been your spiritual support, but he made a big mistake. Just because he wanted to have a lot of money to fix up the house to make it look nicer to others. Mr. Lam stopped, seeing his son staring out the door. Putting his hand on Kwang's shoulder, his voice was sad and thoughtful. Don't think I don't care about anything. I know people look down on our poor family, so I haven't agreed to the matter between you and Lan. That's why I feel helpless and depressed. I'm old and don't have much ability to work to earn money, so I have to rely on gambling to find some luck. If I can take care of you. Who would have thought that it would make you suffer even more? Kwang sighed, turned back to look at his father with more sympathy. Okay, I will try to help you one last time. From now on, please leave me alone. I need to have my own life. I'm so tired. Thanks to his resourcefulness, diligence, and fate, Kwang was able to join the funeral organization team of the commune. The initial income was not much, but it was stable and less difficult, so he was satisfied with that. However, he was still worried because it would take a long time to accumulate capital. He wondered if Lan could wait until then. A few days ago, I went to the funeral of Mr. Hai, a famous rich wood workshop owner in the village. One strange thing he discovered when he and his family placed Mr. Hai's body in the coffin was a large gold ring on the middle finger of his left hand and a necklace larger than 2 taels of gold with precious stones dangling through his shirt. Just by looking at the size, he could calculate that it would be worth about 100 million in cash if sold. Gold buried with the dead, a strange yet familiar thing, not sure if it was Mr. Hai's wish before closing his eyes, or simply because the family wanted to keep the precious jewelry that he loved so much when he was alive. Maybe for that reason, no one dares to take it off now so that his soul can rest in peace. But maybe a few years later when the grave is exhumed, they will bring this gold back. But whatever the reason, Kwang didn't care and didn't need to find out. He just knew that this was his chance to change his life. The most important thing to him now is money. The more the better. Money can change everything. More importantly, when you have money, no one will dare to look down on you anymore. If you work for someone all day, when will you be rich? And if you want to do business to become rich, you must have capital. After thinking and pondering, he made a plan for himself. A crazy thing to do. Dig up Mr. Hai's grave to steal the gold. Tonight is the best chance to do it. He also needs to have the money soon. Too many things are waiting for this money to solve. Kwang calculated very carefully. After getting this amount of gold, he would not use it right away because it would easily arouse suspicion. Next, he would go to the district town, pretending to be a settler, then sell this amount of gold to get a large sum of money. There, he would find a shop to rent to open a cafe, a beverage shop, and bring his lover along. Lan would not have to worry about anything anymore. Life would be different. The future would be brighter. Until now, ghost stories did not bother Kwang much because he had never seen them before anyway. Death is the end, he thought to himself. If digging up a dead body was scary, being discovered by someone else was even more scary. Even though he gave himself 2 choices, one was to have everything to change his life, the other was to lose everything. But this was no joke. At least he would be beaten by his family. At worst, he would go to jail for at least a few years. That was what worried him the most, so he had to be very careful when acting. He couldn't let anyone see or suspect. Kwang, why are you sitting here? While he was lost in thought, Kwang was startled and his eyes widened. Trong was standing in front of him, holding a bright flashlight in his hand. Kwang was both surprised and annoyed by its untimely appearance. Although both of their jobs involved the dead, unlike the funeral team like Kwang, Trong was a professional tomb builder in the village. They had known each other since childhood, but he did not like Trong's personality. Reluctantly, Kwang answered curtly, shaking the bottle of wine in his hand. Drinking alcohol. Can't you see? Trong burst out laughing. He sat down across from Kwang, held the bottle of wine and looked at it, saying, Drinking here? Alone in the middle of a stormy night? You expect me to believe you? Kwang grabbed the bottle, his attitude fierce. Fuck me. What I do has nothing to do with you. Hey, why are you so angry, my friend? I was just asking. Is there something going on? As soon as he discovered Kwang sitting there, Trong quickly sensed something was up. Although it was not clear, Kwang's attitude and the sack lurking behind the banyan tree under the flashlight helped him notice many unusual things. Seeing Kwang did not say anything, he probed, "Is there anything I can do? There's so little work these days, I can't earn much. My wife is about to give birth, so I need money." Listening to Trong, Kwang thought for a moment, intending to invite him to join. After all, 2 people would do it faster. But if so, he would have to split the gold in half, and this was something he never wanted. Kwang's attitude softened. Anyway, he had to be gentle to find a way to chase it away soon. He took a deep drag of his cigarette and said through the smoke, "Yeah, but not now. I'll call you in a few days if anything comes up." "That's great." Trong's eyes lit up, but he was still doubtful. He asked, "But tonight, do you need me to help you with anything? It must be important?" Hearing Trong's question, Kwang suddenly jumped and felt confused. He laughed and changed the subject. "Oh no. What the hell? I've had a lot of annoying things happen today, so I came here to drink." Seeing Trong nod, Kwang looked concerned. "Hey, your wife is pregnant. You never know when she might go into labor, and the storm is coming. Go home and take care of her. I'll call you in a few days. I'm going to do big business in the district. I'll have a lot of work for you. Oh, remember that. If you need anything, just let me know. I'm free these days." Trong smiled happily, but his eyes still glanced at Kwang's sack. He stood up. "That's it. I have to go home." Kwang replied, "Yeah, I'm going home too. A big storm is coming." Looking at Trong's clumsy figure walking home with a flashlight, Kwang sighed, cursing under his breath, even though he felt much better. He tilted his head back and took a long gulp. The alcohol quickly seeped into every muscle, making his body feel excited and hot, erasing the vague fear that had just begun to flicker. His mind felt a little lightheaded and excited. The big sack was placed under the banyan tree. Inside were a shovel, a crowbar, a hammer, some nails, and a flashlight. A small knife was tucked at his waist. That was enough for him to do his job. His years as a construction worker had given him a lot of experience. Carefully holding the sack, he stood up and walked away. His shadow was vague in the vast darkness that was covering the dirt road leading to the field, or as the villagers called it, the road to the cemetery, where Mr. Hai had been buried just a few days ago. During the day, it was already deserted, but at night it was even more gloomy, desolate, and chillingly cold. "We have to hurry. We have to finish before dawn," he said to himself, and walked faster with the strong wind blowing against him, his old sneakers blending with the rustling sound of the grass on both sides of the road. In the sky, several streaks of lightning still flashed, intertwining, revealing the shadows of several graves, looming and appearing ahead. Suddenly, Kwang stopped. There was a sound like footsteps coming from behind. A feeling of unease suddenly appeared in his mind, as if someone was following him. Kwang stood still, turned his head around. Behind was only a long dirt road, a few ancient trees spreading their leaves in the wind like waving arms. The sound of frogs croaking from the fields echoed, sounding eerie and creepy in the quiet night. "Who dares to come out here at this hour?" he muttered and ran into the cemetery. The misty smoke covers hundreds of large and small graves, old and new, lying interwoven in long rows, stretching along the entire path. The deeper we went, the colder and darker the air became. It was not difficult to find Mr. Hai's grave among dozens of other graves surrounding it. He himself had come here with the funeral team to witness his burial. It looked like a high mound of earth, covered with a few wilted wreaths, and weeds had just begun to sprout. He sat down, staring at the portrait of Mr. Hai printed on the tombstone that still smelled of cement. A 70-year-old man with a broad forehead, a large nose, and a thick layer of fat under his chin. The most impressive feature on his face was probably his fierce eyes, always looking deep into the heart of the person opposite. Under the rumbling lightning, Kwang felt that Mr. Hai was staring at him as if he were still alive, making him stand up awkwardly, not daring to look into those fierce eyes any further. The graves here were all 1 meter 8 deep, 2 meters 8 long, and 1 meter 3 wide. With his strength and experience, it would take him at least a few hours to dig them all. So it has to be finished before 4 o'clock in the morning anyway. Holding the shovel in his hand, he reflexively looked around the cemetery. The wind was still blowing, making a sound like someone was crying and lamenting. Gritting his teeth, he dug the shovel deep into the grave. Before he could dig it out, he suddenly stopped. His intuition told him that someone was around. This was the second time he had felt such an uneasy feeling, making him unable to be careless. He stood still, holding his breath, looking around. All around him were cold graves, rising and falling at different heights. His eyes narrowed, slowly and carefully observing, and immediately he discovered a black shadow looming, moving on the back of the grave next to him, looking towards him. Then suddenly, from that direction came a scream. Mew! Kwong suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, a stray cat. He picked up a brick and threw it hard, causing the cat to growl and angrily walk away. What a bastard, he muttered curses. People are afraid of seeing black cats that are twice as big as domestic cats, often foraging in cemeteries, but for Kwong, perhaps they are just wild animals, not enough to bother him. In the cold, deserted cemetery, there was only one person. His hands were stiff and veined, quickly scooping up shovelfuls of dirt and tossing them aside. The alcohol and the gold under the grave urged him more than ever. It was unclear how many hours had passed, but he was soaked from the increasingly heavy rain. He stopped to wipe the sweat from his forehead, panting from exhaustion, his clothes covered in mud. Feeling his eyesight getting blurry, Kwong sat down and shook his head vigorously a few times, making cracking sounds. The scenery around him was still dark and hazy, accompanied by gusts of wind blowing like the wailing of ghosts, calling out to people from deep underground. Kwong looked up to the sky. He was already in a rectangular hole. Suddenly, he heard the sound of shoes stepping on the wooden board. Kwong felt his heart start to pound. He crawled, using both hands to dig a thin layer of soil, pushing it aside. Then he quickly stood up and looked around, his eyes suddenly lit up. The coffin was exposed. Forgetting all his fatigue, Kwong carefully dug around to find a foothold underground. When he finished, he bent down to look around, his hand patting the tightly closed coffin lid. The scent of new wood mixed with the mud created a pungent smell that made his nose itch, making him sniffle and cough a few times. Locating the position, Kwong took the crowbar and poked into the lid, bent his body up and pressed down, using all his strength to pry. The sound of metal squeezing into wood made a terrifying screech. The nails popped out with difficulty. Kwong took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and pushed hard. The crowbar bent slightly, making a clanging sound. The lid flew open, shook for a moment, and then came to rest on the coffin wall. The stench of the decomposing body escaped with the air, rising strongly. Reflexively, Kwong pulled back, raising his hand to cover his mouth. But his abdominal muscles were already rolling, pushing the food in his stomach up his throat. Unable to bear it any longer, he lowered his head and threw up. About 4 or 5 owls came from somewhere, flying around the mouth of the hole, flapping their wings and screeching, squeak, 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 squeak. Kwong was breathing heavily from exhaustion, tears and snot streaming down his face, his mouth already feeling sour after vomiting. He quickly tore off his sleeve and wrapped it tightly around his mouth and nose. The sky was filled with lightning and thunder. Kwong's feet crept closer to the open coffin. He squinted his eyes, cautiously observing with a wary attitude. But the inside was dim and unclear, only able to make out a person lying opposite his line of sight. Kwong trembled as he held the coffin lid, carefully turned it upside down, and pressed it against the hole as if afraid of scratching or damaging it. Before he could turn around, Kwong suddenly held his breath, not daring to drool. His heart was beating wildly as if it was about to burst out of his chest. There were rustling and moving sounds coming from inside Mr. Hai's coffin. Above, a flock of owls were still flying around, calling out repeatedly under the flickering lightning. The noise had not stopped when he heard a wheezing, urgent sound coming from behind him, as if someone was trying to raise their voice. Sweat suddenly broke out from the back of his neck. The cold quickly spread throughout his body, making him want to collapse in fear. Kwong tried his best to calm himself down, but what was happening made him unable to calm down. Could it be that Mr. Hai is still... alive. Just thinking about that terrible thing, Kwang's mouth trembled, forming difficult sounds. No, no. How could that be possible? Instead of an answer, a sizzling sound rang out softly, then grew louder and louder, every detail clearly audible. The sound of fingernails frantically scratching each grain of the coffin seemed to pour straight into his ears, causing goosebumps to appear all over his body, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up in fear. Standing rooted to the bottom of the deep hole, his hand was gingerly placed on the edge of the hole to gain momentum to climb up. But suddenly everything fell silent. Those horrible, chaotic sounds suddenly disappeared. Both surprised and curious, Kwang turned his head around. The coffin still lay there, dimly lit by a faint light. Several owls had landed around the edge of the pit, scratching the ground for insects to eat. Kwang breathed a sigh of relief. I'm hallucinating. How can a dead person come back to life? It's really a loss of spirit. He tiptoed slightly, his head raised to look over the edge of the pit, although he was sure in his mind that no one would dare come to the cemetery at this hour. The small flashlight was now taken out of the sack. He needed enough light to get the gold from Mr. Hai accurately and quickly. Kwang bent down and shined the flashlight from under the coffin. The shiny black leather shoes and the white socks that had turned yellow appeared under the light. The bulging fabric pants hugged the dead man's swollen legs. Through the light that had just passed quickly to his chest, Kwang squinted his eyes because he had just caught a glimpse of something unusual. He shakily held the flashlight and slowly returned to that position. Under the light shining on the coffin wall, there were many fresh scratches. In this deep hole, there was only him and the open coffin. Kwang shined the flashlight towards the dead man's outstretched hand. Although he knew it was absurd, he still vaguely thought that Mr. Hai had come back to life and was using his fingernails to scratch the wood to signal him. Kwang's eyes suddenly lit up. The vague fear suddenly disappeared when the gold ring with precious stones on Mr. Hai's middle finger was sparkling under the flashlight. As if in a dream, he knelt down and leaned forward with an eager expression, reaching out to touch the ring and rubbing it gently, feeling the coolness of the precious metal that made him ecstatic and thirsty. Here it is. Here is the gold. Kwang muttered. Just tomorrow, my life will change. I will have money, lots of money. Forgetting the stench of the corpse, he took off the cloth wrapped around his mouth and used his teeth to bite the flashlight. He picked up Mr. Hai's cold, stiff, gray hand and looked at it. The swollen fingers made the ring stick even more tightly to the bone, making Kwang struggle to pull it out. The more he tried to use force, the more the dead man's skin peeled off piece by piece. Squeak, 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 squeak. Suddenly, Kwang jumped because the owls flew up in panic, flapping their wings and making a loud noise, seemingly scared. Before he could regain his composure, he panicked and dropped the flashlight when he discovered a pair of bright eyes staring at him from inside the coffin. Kwang exclaimed in a gasp of horror. What is that? His face paled as he looked towards those glowing red eyes, his hand trembling as he fumbled for the flashlight. But before he could pick it up, he screamed out loud as a dark shadow suddenly rushed towards his face. The cat, like a miniature black panther, roared angrily and scratched, causing blood to flow down his face, making him feel a sharp pain. It was the first time Kwang encountered such a large lynx, so he struggled to resist. When he finally grabbed the ferocious animal by the neck, he had to use all his strength to throw it to the ground a few times. The claws were sharper than knife blades, digging into Kwang's arms as if they wanted to tear his skin into pieces. He gritted his teeth and squeezed tightly. Its growls gradually faded, giving way to Kwang's curses. Panting raggedly from exhaustion, he used both hands to throw the large, heavy animal onto the edge of the pit, but without using up his strength, it fell into the coffin, struggled for a while before finally lying still. Its bright eyes gradually dimmed like a candle blown out by the wind, blending into the darkness of the night. Despite the burning blood, Kwang groped over Mr. Hai's corpse, snatched the gold necklace off his neck, then happily crumpled it up and stuffed it into his pocket. Thunder and lightning began to rumble violently. The whole night was lit up by giant centipede-shaped lightning bolts crawling across the sky. Kwang only had time to look up and quickly took Mr. Hai's hand to remove the remaining ring. But the ring stuck tightly and refused to come off. With no other choice, Kwang reached into his pants to find a Thai knife, forcing him to dislocate Mr. Hai's hand to get the ring. He placed the dead man's cold gray hand on the mouth of the coffin and began to cut, creating a screeching sound of metal rubbing against bone. Mr. Hai's finger was about to fall off. The piece of skin stuck to it, making it dangle and about to fall off. Suddenly, Kwang jumped when the black cat started to wiggle awake. It screamed and jumped out. Mr. Hai's body began to move. His fingers twitched, slowly spreading out in Kwang's hand. He held his breath in fear. The knife fell to the ground. His whole body turned cold, his face pale and bloodless, his body trembling as he gradually retreated backwards. But before he could run away, the corpse sat up in the coffin. Mr. Hai's cold hand grabbed his wrist. Immediately after that, lightning struck down from the sky, making a deafening boom, boom sound, and rain poured down like a waterfall. Kwang screamed in horror when he saw Mr. Hai's face with cloudy eyes, whites all over, staring at him with hatred. Let me go, I beg you." Kwang was panting as he tried to pull Mr. Hai's hand away from his. He grabbed the edge of the hole, swung himself up to escape, but before he could lift one leg, a hand grabbed him tightly and pulled him back. Save me, ghost in the gut." There were rumbling and growling sounds coming from below, making Kwang too terrified to turn around and look back. He screamed and kicked his legs, struggling, his hands clutching the edge of the hole to get up. Boom, boom. Lightning struck down, causing the ground to scatter everywhere. Kwang felt dizzy, his head spun wildly, and then he passed out. In his dream, he heard a ghostly laugh echoing clearly from Mr. Hai's coffin, then a growling voice full of resentment accompanied by the thunder and rain of a stormy night. "Give me the gold is mine." The splashing sound in the water woke Kwang up. The water had almost filled the deep hole. A dead body was lying face down, floating right behind him. Kwang squinted his eyes and found Trong there too, holding a flashlight and searching. "So you've been following me from the beginning? Good." Kwang thought to himself. His eyes lit up as he thought of a plan to blame Trong. He gently slid down the water hole carefully to avoid being detected. Trong bowed his head, engrossed in shining the flashlight down the hole. He also wanted to get this gold. While searching, he said, "I knew you were up to something. I just didn't expect you to dare dig up Mr. Hai's grave to take the gold. But now it's all mine." Kwang was startled when he heard Trong's voice. He put his face down in the water, and when he saw his friend's hand flailing around, Kwang quickly grabbed it tightly and pulled him down. Trong only had time to scream out loud before losing his balance and falling into the deep hole. As quick as lightning, Kwang hurriedly climbed up to the edge of the hole despite Trong's arms and legs flailing around wildly. He planned to stay on the shore, and if Trong came up, Kwang would hold him down and drown him. But something unusual was happening down in the deep hole. Trong's scream was trying to scream, "Ghost! Ghost! Save me! Ghost!" Trong was struggling, his hands holding onto the edge of the hole, but someone had pulled him down. His hands still tried to reach up for help, struggling before sinking to the bottom of the grave. Seeing no movement, Kwang crawled closer to check. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide open in horror. The grave had now become a deep, murky, foul-smelling pit that had swallowed Trong. Tomorrow, when Trong's body is found in there, everyone will think that he caused this and is dead. As soon as he thought about it, Kwang smiled contentedly. But before he could stand up, he was startled when a large round head with the gray skin of a dead man emerged from the water hole, its cloudy eyes wide open, looking straight at him. "Mr. Hai? No, it can't be, it can't be." Kwang's teeth were chattering. He panicked and crawled back, then staggered to his feet and ran away. The eerie, spine-chilling laughter echoed behind him, but it gradually became more and more distant until it blended into the sound of the pouring rain. Kwang's legs staggered as he ran on the village road straight towards Lan's house. Lan dreamily heard her dog barking and then suddenly howling. Its claws were scratching fiercely at her door. Knock, 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 knock. Lan woke up with a start. She listened attentively to the knock on the door, followed by someone softly calling her name. "Kwong," Lan exclaimed. "Is that you? It's me. Open the door for me." Lan hurriedly got out of bed, but when she reached the door, she suddenly hesitated and asked, "Ooh, what's going on? Why are you here at this hour? Open the door, hurry, I have the money." "Money? What money?" Lan was confused and didn't understand what was going on, but she gently lifted the door latch. As soon as she saw Kwong, she quickly raised her hand to stop her scream. Why? Why is there so much blood on your face?" "It's okay. It's okay. I'm just slightly injured. We have to escape from here." Hearing her lover say that, Lan stammered, "Run away? It's raining and windy like this. I have earned money. We will go to the district town to do business. I will take care of you." "But why go now? I'll explain later. Let's go." While speaking, Kwong grabbed Lan's hand and pulled her away, causing her to panic and pull back. "Wait a minute. I suddenly feel worried. There's not much time left. We have to leave here before dawn," Kwong hurriedly explained. As if to reinforce his belief, he took out a gold necklace from his pocket, showed it to Lan, and continued. "I have money here. We will get married. Where did you get this necklace from? Don't tell me you stole it or else," Kwong interrupted. "No, it's ours now. Don't worry, let's go." "But I'm scared. Let's talk tomorrow. You should go home." Starting to feel annoyed, Kwong snapped, "You're kicking me out? What did you promise me? This is money. Then what?" "So we're gonna get married." Kwong rushed to hug his lover to pull her out. "Let me go. Let me go." I'm screaming now. "Let me go. Let me go." As she spoke, Lan clung to the door, fumbled for the light switch, and turned it on. As soon as the light came on, Kwong angrily dragged her out the door, ignoring Lan's screams and falling backwards to the ground. Lan's parents woke up, turned on the light, and started running to her room. Kwong panicked and ran away for fear of being discovered. He said, "I won't let you go. Remember that. I'll come back to take you away." The next night in the hospital, sitting by her daughter's bedside, as soon as she saw her husband enter, Mrs. Hugh cried and said, "I don't understand why, out of nowhere, it suddenly went crazy like this. What should I do now?" The husband looked at his daughter, who was in a coma, her skin pale, occasionally twitching. He blamed, "It's because you forbade their relationship that this happened. It's all your fault." Mrs. Hugh sniffled. "I just care about Lan. I want her to get a good husband. Why are you blaming me now? How did you get to the police station? Is our family implicated?" The husband sighed. "Now the police have investigated and found out that last night, Kwong and Trong dug up Mr. Hai's grave to steal gold. Trong choked to death in a rainwater pit, and his wife was about to give birth." Mrs. Hugh opened her mouth wide. "What about that? That Kwong? Have you found him yet?" The husband shook his head, his face wrinkled. "Poor thing, the police found a gold chain in his pocket." "So where is Kwong now? Is he okay?" The husband sadly said, "Kwong also died last night." A moment later he continued. "He was struck by lightning in the head. His body was floating in Mr. Hai's grave. I feel so sorry and regretful. I just hope he will soon be released and not come back to haunt my daughter again." After hearing her husband speak, Mrs. Hugh covered her face and cried bitterly, both sad and scared. "That's right, sir. No wonder my daughter said she dreamed last night that Kwong appeared and knocked on the door and asked her to follow him. When she turned on the light, she saw Kwong's head was broken in half. Blood was still flowing down his body. I thought it was just a nightmare, but unexpectedly. Lan was so scared she went crazy, sir." Lan lay dreaming on the hospital bed, feeling cold as the wind howled and blew open the window. Rushing at her, she slowly opened her eyes when she saw a figure standing outside the window calling her name. "Lan, hey, come with me. Get away from this place." Lan panicked and jumped up, and right in front of her was Kwong with his crushed head, gray skin, and cold hands dragging her away. She screamed in terror, her body convulsed, her mind in utter panic. "No, no, let me go. Let me go." The creepy, eerie laughter echoed throughout the night, along with Lan's crazy, dazed face.